get this rolling. Welcome, everybody. This is the College Sports with Two College Kids podcast. I am Shank Wolski. Right beside me is Logan Clausen. And we are going to be talking today about some of the underrated, overrated, and some players that are perfectly rated today. And first off, we're going to start talking about a little bit the overrated players that in college football that maybe have not been living up to expectations. So we really want to start this off with a big uh, controversial one that maybe some fans in college may not be convinced that he's overrated yet, or um, that we cannot, really talk about right away. And it's Arch Manning. Arch Manning. We're going to talk about him, the quarterback for Texas, one of the top rated recruits in 2023. And I think, what was it? Ian Maliava was up there as well. Nico Ian Maliava, Keon Keeley. And his first year this year as the starter for Texas. And a lot of people just on social media, I feel like, had an opinion that he was going to be this great next quarterback, right? You got, Heisman quarterbacks like Bryce Young, Tua Tagovailoa, Stenson Bennett, who was a Heisman front runner before, guys like that, specifically like in the SEC, that we felt that everyone felt that Arch Manning was going to have that type of expectation around him. And I think specifically when he went and did an interview on the offseason, he obviously told himself that, it's just hype. But I think everyone just rode with it. I know Paul Feynman from ESPN was ravaging about him going up against Ohio State and kicking some butt. But I mean, if you look at the stats again, week one, I mean, against a really talented OSU defense led by Matt Patricia, he went 17 for 30 for only 170 yards, and he only had 56% completion percentage, which I feel like for a quarterback, it's your first game going in the shoe, going in Buckeye Stadium. I feel like that was the game that you really needed to get, that hype right away. But you know what, you watched that. I mean, you also watched couple games that I noticed was against UTEP, against a team that was really it's a Power Four school, but a team that he struggled against. I mean, they won at the end of the day, but 11 for 25 uh, completions to attempts to only 114 yards. You feel like that's something you don't have as one of the top recruited quarterbacks, especially when you look at Texas's offense, and you got Ryan Wingo, you got Jack Andres, who they brought in as a transfer, C.J. Baxter, Quintrevion Wisner. I feel like with the quarterback that you have with all those weapons, it's just the expectations are not there for you. Anything to comment?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, he's definitely one of the most, I would say, one of the easier ones to put in an overrated list, in my opinion. I don't know if it's just the hype around him being part of the Manning family, or if it's just being one of the, like you said, one of the top recruits in the 2023 class. But um, definitely has like your typical first year starting season going so far. Nothing that you would expect out of the ordinary, but like you said, against OSU, particularly struggling 17 for 30 with 170 yards. Um, and then after that, you go to UTEP, struggling there as well. It's just not what you would expect from somebody who had that much hype around him in the offseason or coming into his freshman year.
You even look back in 2024 when Ewers were struggling. When Quinn Ewers were struggling, they wanted him right after. So it's a lot of the hype around him. I think what we're trying to say is, a guy like that who's that talented. Yes, his last name is Manning, but at the end of the day, you need to perform the way you were and how you performed in high school. I think that's just one of the main things. And again, they're struggling. I think they're only the top 25 team. They're right at 20 or something as of Saturday, October 25th. But I think one of his only better games was really against OU. He in the Red River rivalry, and he only put up a touchdown, but I think he did think he's getting a little bit better, but at the same time, he's definitely not one of the top-rated quarterbacks. I think when you do look at a guy like, especially the quarterbacks in the SEC like Nussmeier and Lenora Sellers, there's a lot of guys that you could say were a little overhyped in the offseason, specifically probably because of the conference. But we'll continue. We're going to continue with another Texas Longhorn, and again, this guy really I feel like has not shown. He's shown a lot, but it's against some of the bigger games where he did not execute. And that was Colin Simmons, one of their top rated prospects, actually from last year where they recruited him, defensive end. Had a really strong season last year as a freshman, and then comes in here as a sophomore. Really, against Ohio State when you go up against one of the better teams, and you're going up against teams like San Jose, Sam Houston, and Florida. I mean, he only had about 1.5 sacks through that entire stretch. Against Kentucky, he had his season high in 3 sacks. I think he had a season high in pressures as well. But again, that Texas defense really, does rely on him a lot. But I think the one thing that they overhype him with was that first game, right? I think that's a consistent thing we're going to talk about is that first game when these Texas players that you go into Ohio State, you got to be able to force some things. And that week he went into and posted on Instagram about Julian Sain being the starting quarterback, and he didn't get a single
it's
sack.
just when you're rated that high, you just have to perform. When it comes to like bigger games, you need to make your presence felt. And obviously against Ohio State, he just didn't do that. I mean, some pressures, no sacks though. And then to add on to that 3 game stretch versus San Jose State, Sam Houston and Florida, only 1.5 sacks, no forced fumbles. Especially there against the lower ranked teams, you have to put up numbers there, and you just didn't do it. So I mean, it's maybe not so much against Ohio State that matters, but for you to go into a 3 game stretch versus teams like that, you just have to put up numbers.
Definitely the easier stretch of games. You need to show who you are.
Right.
I think there's definitely players. Again, it's early in the season, but we're only into week 9 right now of college, and we still don't know either what Colin Simmons or Arch Manning are really. We don't know what the kind of forces they might be. But so we'll go ahead and move along with that one. We're going to talk about one of the Big Ten players, and I thought one of the Big Ten players that need to be talked about. Their team's 3-4 right now is Penn State's, and their corner AJ Harris, who I think really showed a lot of early hype. Again, it's another early hype mentality with some of these players that a lot of people thought he was going to go in the first round or the first 2 rounds of the draft, and I think you're really seeing later on. First up against 3 teams in Nevada, Villanova, and well, I forgot the other one, but he put up lockdown numbers for a player that you have to put lockdown numbers up against those teams that are not as good as you are. And I feel like again the biggest game was against Oregon where he faced one
Right.
of the better freshmen.
Yeah, like you said, it just struggled versus Decoria Moore against Oregon. I mean, when I look at AJ Harris, I see decent tackler, but as far as ball skills for a corner, 0 interceptions so far. Um, and against Decoria Moore, a freshman, you just have to, especially against a freshman, you just have to look to put up decent numbers. But I mean, run defense he struggled with it consistently when he watches tape. So I mean, it's just another one where just a lot of hype, and you just haven't really put up the numbers.
And I think you look at the 4 game stretch they're in right now, then they've
Right.
all the losses they've had. You go up against quarterback like a sophomore in Dante Moore. You go up against a quarterback like Nico Imaliava. Quarterback like Preston Stone and Northwestern, and obviously last week, and Mark Gronowski, and those are quarterbacks you really have struggled. But Imaliava was the one where he's on a 3 game winning streak, has really performed better. But like in a Jim Knowles defense, you got to be able to cover, and you got to be able to make takeaways. I think that was the biggest thing that they are dealing with right now, hiring him, and knowing that he's got to play better. So the next one we want to talk about um, before we get on to the underrated players is Peter Woods. So everyone knows Clemson has great defensive tackle production, right? With Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence, Cleveland Farrell, uh, Miles Murphy, another name that came a few years in the draft. But this guy, I feel like when you watch him, yes, he's a wrecker, he's a wrecking force, and I felt like when you looked at last year's film, he did struggle against the run big time. I think the biggest thing was against Texas in that college football playoff game, where you did not see a force to be reckoned with in terms of run defense. But I feel like he was solid for them that year. I believe he was a sophomore that year, so he's going to get better as the year goes on. And he's 324 pounds. I mean, that's for a guy that's that big, you definitely need to be a wrecker in the run game. So
Yeah, for Peter Woods, when you like you said, when you look at previous defensive tackle play from Clemson, uh, great defensive tackles coming out of there and going into the NFL with a lot of hype around them. And I guess the specifically that is one of the reasons why you might consider him to be an overrated player. Yeah, I mean, you start with the game against LSU, 5 total tackles, and he put some decent pressure on their quarterback, Garrett Newsmeyer. So, I mean, it gives you an idea of what he could be. But when you go back to Clemson and their defensive tackle play over the years, he's just someone with a lot of hype around him who's not really shown on the field. So after that LSU game, you really haven't seen much, even against Texas. Looked off even with him there. So I mean, just as any other player that's overrated, just hasn't really put up numbers outside of a couple games.
when you go to Clemson, you feel like you need to be that player that steps up, and especially with a
Right.
guy like Dabo, who's
Especially with a guy like Dabu and just the play that Clemson has had over the past couple of years, especially at his position. It's just he's definitely on the bottom of the barrel for the ones that have gone through there over the past couple of years.
now we did double dose on Texas players on this list because you watch a lot more of them if you have like Fox or ABC or CBS. But I want to talk. I want to double down on Penn State players because Nicholas Singleton has been really undervalued or underperformed as a running back, and with him and Katron Allen coming back this year, again, it's a game in between games when you're one of the main top three backs in college football with your partner Katron Allen being in the same backfield as you feel like you need to perform. And I feel like that offense with Andy Kolenecki, who put a really good offense with Penn State last year in terms of just running the football, getting Tyler Warren the ball. Now this year, you kind of focus on those running backs a lot more, and you know he's just struggled. I feel like Katron Allen's numbers have been a lot better. Him against even against like teams like Iowa and Northwestern, you see a lot more production from Allen versus Singleton, which is maybe why they've gone towards Allen a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, for Nicholas Singleton, when you look at having another person in your room that competes with you, you just don't see too many things that stand out over the other people in his room. So, I mean, 5 out of his 6 touchdowns were against Villanova. So, I mean, against the other bigger teams, you just haven't seen much production out of them. And when you have somebody else in your room that is pressuring you for that starting spot, you just have to put up the numbers.
Again, Singleton could get hotter as the season goes on,
Right.
but like we said, 5 out of those 6 touchdowns, you'll go up against three schools that you don't consider to be college football contenders, right? You want to go up against a team like Ohio State, Texas, Clemson, LSU, and you want to put up numbers. Even a team like Indiana, you got to go up there and you got to perform. A player that who has that much hype around him and has had good production. Like last year, he had good production, 2 1,000-yard backs in Penn State. Like that's a lot to have, especially with a guy like Tyler Warren at tight end last year. Them not having him obviously struggles, and them not having their starting quarterback right now, Drew Aller, as of today, is gonna help them struggle. So before we go to the overrated or the underrated list, excuse me, I really want to make an honorable mention to Dylan Rayola and just talk about him a little bit because really Rayola again another top prospect in the 2023 class, and him going first, flipping his commitment from Georgia to Nebraska, I think shows that he wants to compete and be able to win with a team like Nebraska, especially with a team like Nebraska, who hasn't had really a good stretch of winning seasons. You know, their only winning season really was last year, and that was under Matt Rule. So Rule's trying to get the best out of Rayola, especially when you have guys this year like Nazir Hunter, Jacob Barney, who are your top targets. Also Lindenmeyer, their tight end, as well. Obviously, having a great run game at Nebraska is the big thing. But I feel like one of the bigger things that you see out of Rayola again is that those 3 weeks against Cincinnati, Akron, and Houston Christian, which really does anyone know who Houston Christian is? I mean, let me be honest, I don't know. I know who Cincinnati and Akron are, but you get 8 touchdowns and no interceptions off of that. Now again, his first Big Ten play this year against Michigan, yeah, he did have 3 touchdowns, but he also did have that interception, which did cost him the points, and he got sacked 7 times in that game. But really, I think the Big Ten play, look, outside of that 3-0 start, he's been 2-2.
Yeah, so I mean, when you look at Dylan Raiola, obviously transferring, you go to Nebraska expecting to show your talent a little bit better than what you would anywhere else, being the starter. And he started off decent. He really hasn't been playing bad, I would say, the whole year. But I mean, when it comes to Big Ten play, you start Big Ten play and you just kind of just fell off quite a bit from where you started at the beginning of the season. I mean, then you struggle against a Michigan State defense that just hasn't been good all year. One of the worst defenses in the Big Ten. And you just can't put up numbers like that, especially when you transfer out of a school and then you go to Nebraska hoping to get some a little bit, I don't really know, like statistics put on your name and to get your draft stock to rise a little higher, and it just hasn't gone.
Yeah, he's still got plenty of time. He's still got
Right.
16 touchdowns, 5 picks this year for a quarterback. Again, in Nebraska, like they haven't had really consistent quarterback play. I think the only quarterback that they've had was decent was Adrian Martinez, and that was back in 2021. So I mean, they've been struggling to try to find a consistent quarterback. So that's the start of the overrated players. We're going to go to the underrated players next, and again, we're kind of going off the same trend as we did with the overrated players, with having a couple players from the same team. But I really wanted to start off with Justice Haynes. He was one of those main guys I think in the transfer portal last year, where everyone was after him. I believe Ohio State and Michigan were both after him in the portal. Ohio State ended up going to get C.J. Donaldson, but Justice Haynes, you just watch him and you look at every single game he's played. He's been very he's done well. Even against teams like OU and USC, who have some strong run defenses. He's even gone for over 100 yards. And even with USC coming out of that game, he didn't play the whole game, but he still got 50 yards in one half.
Yeah, when you look at Justice Haynes, you think of he's just a very electric running back for Michigan. Every game outside of USC where he's left with an injury, he's put up extremely good numbers. Like I said, going back to just an electric running back, and almost reminds you of like Blake Corum when you take a look at how he plays and everything like that. You transfer out of Alabama, going to Michigan, and he's just been really great for the team and really good replacement for Blake Corum after he leaves for the draft.
I think you also have to make the point again. Michigan's offensive line has not been healthy the whole year. Like Giovanni Alhadi, their left guard, is a few games, and you look at Evan Link, who's now hurt. Even with some of those injuries on the offensive line, a lot of rotation with new players, he's still finding ways to put over 100 plus yards, even 125 plus yards, and a touchdown on every single team. Again, like I said, outside of the USC game where he left with that rib injury, he's been very good, and I feel like that his consistency shows that he's going to stay on the field a lot. But he's still even the leading rusher in the Big Ten right now, with guys like Jonah Coleman and Emmett Johnson, who are right there with him. But I think he still leads the Big Ten with rushing yards. Not rushing touchdowns, because I believe that goes to Jonah Coleman right now. But even with a guy like Jordan Marshall, like in that backfield as a sophomore who showed a lot of promise. And he still gets those touches, man. Even in pass blocks, even in running plays. I feel like that shows how much of a leader it is. You look at his tape at Alabama. Look, he didn't have that many snaps, but over 400 yards and 6 touchdowns at Alabama last year with Coach DeBoer. I mean, you don't get your guy the football. I mean, they're going to find ways to leave. So, but we're going to go ahead and bounce out to another Michigan player. I really wanted to talk about Jayshon Barham. So Barham comes from Maryland last year to Michigan. Obviously, we know how good that Michigan defensive line was with Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, and Derek Moore. But this year, they've had a little bit more inconsistent defensive line play with guys like Benny, Derek Moore. And so they transitioned him from the linebacker position after that OU game to defensive end. And he's really put up some good numbers. You kind of get a little bit of a Micah Parson-esque like player.
Yeah, when you look at Jayshon Barham, one of the better edge prospects this year, in my opinion. Like you said, converting him from linebacker to defensive end, he's got some versatility to him, which makes him stand out a little bit more than some of the other defensive ends and linebackers. And when you look at the Oklahoma game, good performance with 2 sacks, and then Central Michigan as well, where you have to put up numbers against Central Michigan. If you're a player for a bigger team, especially in the same state. And then 7 pressures and 5 quarterback hits in that game against Nebraska. Just a really good all-around good performer in terms of being a linebacker and a defensive end, bringing that versatility to the defense for Michigan. Good standout player and probably a first or high second-round draft pick.
We didn't obviously talk about the last few games he's had because he's really been blocked. He's been chipped. He's gotten a lot of double teams as with an edge rusher. He's been playing against more mobile quarterbacks like Damon Williams, Jaden Mayava. Those quarterbacks are going to find a way to not get pressure.
Yeah,
but
and it's just the way that the teams, they know what he can bring to the table in terms of being a good defender, giving him them chips and double teams, just trying to slow him down because they know how good of a player he can be and how big of a record he can be for a quarterback.
And that leaves other opportunities for guys like Derek Moore, TJ guys like that who can, again, are back, our Derek Moore's a starter, but, he hasn't had a strong start. But with Barham being more of a attention getter from a lot of these defenses, and you'll probably see through these last 5 games, and I think specifically against, these next 4 games against Northwestern, Maryland, Michigan State, and Purdue, you're going to see that maybe, Barham is going to be a problem, and people might not forget to, remember that, again, he's on the field. So we're going to go ahead and stick with the Big Ten because this is a player that, Michigan, I hope they go after in the transfer portal of MSU does end up, failing this year and go, because that would be very nice to give Bryce Underwood a weapon like this and Nick Marsh, because he's been really good. And I think outside of, if you look at a guy like these guys in the recruiting like Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams, he was a 3rd ranked player in terms of wide receivers and coming out of college, and he went to Michigan State. He put up numbers there.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Nick Marsh, just a really good, just like when you look at Justice Haynes, just an electric player for an offense. Doesn't really get as much consideration for being one of the better wide receivers in the Big Ten. And then, I mean, I looked on a list. I'm not sure who made it, but I don't even think Nick Marsh was mentioned as one of the top 100 players on that list. And when you look at him, just in a crowded receiver core in terms of the year that he was brought in, and I believe it was 2024. And you have just Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams. It's just kind of hard to put your name out there when you have players like that. But I mean, Nick Marsh, just really good player for Michigan State, and he puts up numbers even in a pretty decent receiver core there at the university. I believe he broke freshman records for the university in receiving yards, and I believe it was catches as well. Just a really good player that doesn't really get the recognition being in the Big Ten with Jeremiah Smith.
I think just not even being in the Big Ten, but also, who he's playing with. I think, Aiden Childs is, a solid quarterback, but again, he's, that quarterback carousel that they have. You got so many guys, playing there, and Nick Marsh has got to be communicating with those guys every single time. But again, it's kind of that room with Christian McCray and Omari Kelly, who again are that's arguably one of the top 10 wide receiver trios in college football. It's he's stayed consistent even in a struggling year for Michigan State. And again, like we said, if he ends up wanting to go to the transfer portal, he's going to have a lot of opportunities to go with a lot of teams, and hopefully the team in Ann Arbor that ends up picking him up. So we'll go ahead and move on and talk about. We're going to go to the ACC, and we're going to talk about Jaron Kawhi Sakapulete. Hope I got that right. I'm pretty sure I got it right. But he's a freshman quarterback at Cal, and when they first got him in there, they thought it was Devin Brown, the Ohio State transfer that was going to be starting at California. But he came in right away. Like the first game, he was having numbers. First two games, he started with 3 touchdowns. Against really, again, good solid teams in Minnesota and Oregon State. But he's just showing a lot of potential. And like I said, Devin Brown's really pushed him to be better. And even with the 10 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, I feel like you give freshmen a little bit more leniency in terms of the turnovers
Right.
they give up.
When you look at the quarterback from Cal, I mean, he's definitely found a way on the field over the transfer quarterback Devin Brown, showing a lot of potential. 3 touchdowns, like you mentioned, against Minnesota and Oregon State in some of your first games that you've started in. In terms of freshman, he's definitely put up decent numbers. Just not really what you'd expect from a typical freshman. He's put up decent numbers and definitely makes his name heard of, especially being from Cal, where you might not get that recognition.
You definitely see because again, ACC play. Not everyone's going to think that the good quarterback play is going to come from the ACC.
Right.
I mean, you got some great quarterbacks in the ACC right now, with Kate Klubnik, uh, Carson Beck, Haynes King, who's doing really well for Georgia Tech. But he's a sneaky name to look out and think about more often because he's going to be there for another 2 or 3 years, and potentially only two. Because if he does a lot better, he's probably going to be trying to find a way onto a roster in the NFL. The last one I want to mention before we go to the honorable mentions is a guy from Texas Tech, and I know this is another interesting one from the Pac-12, but Jacob Rodriguez. Now, this guy, I think you watch him play. I think it's the sleeves for me that get him because he wears 2 sleeves. That's like it looks like more of a receiver wearing number
Right.
10, but as a linebacker, he shows up, and you look at the numbers where with 1 sack again as a linebacker, it looks pretty good. Barham numbers last year when he was only a linebacker, but 4 forced fumbles as a linebacker and 2 interceptions, and one of those interceptions coming against the 15 ranked team in Utah. I mean, you got to give him a lot of credit.
Yeah, when you look at Jacob Rodriguez, he's just a very versatile linebacker. You see him all over the field. Maybe not sack wise, but I mean, then again, he's a linebacker. You don't really expect too many sacks from a linebacker. But 4 forced fumbles and 2 interceptions, just really good, versatile threat at linebacker for Texas Tech, and he's really shown it being almost a one-man wrecking crew for that defense.
They talk a lot about Texas Tech with paying their players with NIL money, and again, even though that's a way to go, they did give Rodriguez a good amount of money, but again, he's showing why he's one of the better linebackers right now. You got to have good linebacker play in order to win in college. I mean, go look at the teams like Ohio State. They got 2 really good linebackers over there. You got to go look at a team like Miami. They got some good linebacker play. And look at Arizona State. They got some solid linebacker play over there as well. Again, you got to find ways to pay to play, right? And it's again that NIL kind of impacts it, but he's shown why he's one of the better players and I think better linebackers, and you're gonna see him on Sundays, in my opinion. And the way I just look at the Utah game, like you could look at what he's done against Utah, against ranked opponents. That's kind of what I have to say to really just finish it up. We're gonna go ahead and do it an honorable mention with Decorian Moore. I didn't. You don't really need to say much about Decorian Moore because again, a freshman wide receiver who goes out there in Oregon, who they lose Evan Stewart in the beginning of the year, and he was their top target. So they really relied on Decorian Moore to play a lot more. And again, when we talked about AJ Harris from Penn State, he was one of those guys that was getting bullied by that freshman.
Yeah, and then I mean, DeCorian Moore being out of Oregon, just a really good team the past couple of years for the Big Ten and Oregon. And I mean, just to be a freshman and make your presence felt on a team with a lot of superstars that can go to the NFL like Oregon, it shows really what you can be for the next coming years. Definitely going to be one of the better threats when it comes to just being there on Saturdays and being a decent player for that team. Um, Definitely going to be a decent draft pick coming out of Oregon.
You definitely see when you look at Oregon, they got a bunch of stars over
Yeah,
there. With Mackay Hughes, Jordan Whittington, they use a lot of running backs over there. About four running backs, mostly every single game. But he kind of gets that Jeremiah Smith treatment a little bit in a way
yeah,
because they also have a guy in Kenyon Sadiq over there who's getting some pretty good numbers and kind of a Tyler Warren-esque like player who's versatile. But with Dante Moore being over there, they got a great connection. Even if they're not connecting early, they're connecting later in the game to make some big plays. So that's going to be our overrated and underrated players right off the bat. We're going to go ahead and finish off with some perfectly rated players. And again, the perfectly rated players are just players who are like living, like we said, living up to expectation. Even if they're kind of underperforming a little bit, they're still in a good position to just, still be one of those top rated players like they were supposed to. And I think we need to start with this player early on because, he's just doing really well at Ohio State, Jeremiah Smith.
yeah. He's just an absolute monster. Even going back to his freshman year, just like I said before, just an absolute monster. Being sometimes even force fed the ball. Um, just a really electric player out of Ohio State with a team that has just like a Decorian Moore over there, just a lot of superstars on that offense. And I mean, being the number one, I think he was rated number one on 24/7 Sports for the top receiver and recruit in his whole entire class, and he's just put up numbers like that. Just an absolute beast for Ohio State.
And even transitioning from Will Howard to a freshman and Julian Sain, who, again, you don't get a lot of snaps with Julian Sain because last year they were in a bunch of blowout games or a bunch of close games. He's building a really good connection with Jeremiah Smith. Even though you don't see the numbers are really impressive. Like, again, we went over 100 yards both against Ohio and Grambling State, but he gets a lot of attention. I think that's the biggest thing. And when you watch games and you watch tape, he's getting first downs. And that's what you got to do in college, right? And he's got a bunch of players around him, and Max Clare and Carnell Tate, who are two highly rated players in their own positions. But I feel like just with that offense, just with Jeremiah Smith, everything goes around him, and Tate finds ways to get open. Claire finds ways to get open. And Julian Sain's got like the most easiest job in the world. Just throw the ball to him. And you got, even teams like Illinois, you got Illinois trying to double cover him, and Wisconsin's trying to triple cover him, and he still makes a play. Like he's still performing the way he should be. And I feel like that's, again, one of the guys who's going to be a top 5 pick probably in his draft, unless something, really happens in his stockpile, plows out. So we're going to go back to the ACC play because I feel like Miami has one of those really underrated tackles in Francis Muyoga. Now, I may have chopped that name a little bit, but he's their right tackle for Miami, protecting Carson Beck. And I really, against Notre Dame, against a team like Notre Dame, when you go up, against Florida State, who in an environment, he's showing up, and he's not back down from being one of those top tackles in the draft and one of those top tackles in college football right
Yeah,
now.
it's just when you think of him, you're just not one of the flashiest names, especially being a tackle. You don't really get too much recognition on your name for being a tackle, not so much as if you're a quarterback, wide receiver, or running back. But he's definitely one of the best offensive linemen in that group. And going up against good competition like Notre Dame and Florida, you still put up the numbers and hold your own against a good defense.
And especially because, again, like I said, when I put like Notre Dame and Florida have some of one of the best defensive lines in the country. You can also put Ohio State in there, obviously, but he holds up his ground, and it gives Beck plenty of time to give the ball to his freshman and Malachi Tony, and also get some running lanes for his two guys, and Mark Fletcher and Jordan Lyle, who, again, Beck may have struggled in his last game, but definitely wasn't because of his top rated tackle. I feel like he was a lot of times you look at the tape, he's bullying people and he finds ways to get loose and find running lanes and always find a way to block somebody. This one's going to be an interesting one because I kind of really talk about him as Johnny Manziel. My partner, of course, over here doesn't think so. It's Diego Pavia from Vanderbilt. Pavia is really, I feel like, has shown a lot of potential ever since transferring from New Mexico State. Like even from last year, he's shown his ability to not just throw the ball but run the football. He's averaging over 40 yards a game as of right now as a running quarterback. And again, you'd think, well, 40 yards, that's not really the best as a running quarterback, but he's going up there. And again, he's led them to this year to their best ranking since 1947. They're in the top 10 right now. Their only losses to Alabama. I feel like, when you look at Vanderbilt, you look at this terrible school, but now you go and look at them with Pavia, everyone's starting to get on the hype train with them.
Yeah, definitely. Just a really good potential Heisman favorite for the next coming years. And I mean, just a team like you mentioned, when you think of Vanderbilt, you don't really think of too many good teams over the past years. And I mean, just for him being as electric as he is with his legs and just being a good quarterback in general, just to lead a team like that doesn't really have too many good players on it, aside from him and a couple other guys. Um, just really good for him to make a name for himself at a small school and, like you mentioned, lead them to one of their best teams since 1947.
Yeah. I mean, everyone started to think about him and talk about him when that Alabama game happened against the number one team in the country last year against Jalen Milroe and company. And they put up pretty good of a shootout and, showed that they are legit and they were going to be legit this year. A lot of people didn't think so. Pavia was talking to Paul Feynman in the offseason. Diego told him, he said, hey, we're going to go out there and win a national championship. And Feynman didn't believe him. He was saying, are you dead serious? And he said, yeah, I'm dead serious. I don't joke about things like that. I just see a lot from him as a Johnny Manziel type of player. He's got that swagger, like you said. He's again 19 touchdowns total. I mean, you got 15 in the air and 4 on the ground. I mean, he's the quarterback in the top 10. He's got on the 10th ranked team in the nation. He's putting out really interesting statistics and numbers for a quarterback who's playing at Vanderbilt. And I think that's one of the biggest things is you see a program like that, you get a player like that who's playing that well. It just shows that, more of it's on him versus maybe the whole team.
Almost putting up some rushing numbers compared to some of the bottom tier running backs, just for a quarterback to be putting up numbers like that
Yep.
with his legs is kind of insane,
Yep.
especially coming out of Vanderbilt, where you have a lot of good competition, especially like Alabama, and just putting up numbers like that against a team like Alabama that's been good for I don't even know how many years, so many years. It's just really good for him to be putting up numbers like that against big teams.
We're going to go ahead and go to a team doesn't have a conference. It's they're not in a conference. It's the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and their corner Leonard Moore. Um, Obviously, early on, like he did struggle a little bit against a guy like Malachi Tony, who's only a freshman. Again, look, they were going through a new defense. Al Golden was their defensive coordinator last year. They're going through a new defensive coordinator and trying to figure out what he wants to design and scheme up. I felt like it's one of his best games. Look, again, even against a team like A&M, where he did struggle a little bit, there was a lot of highlights where he did, get a couple an interception, and he got 2 against Boise, against Mado Madsen, who really thought a lot of people thought was going to be a really solid quarterback for them, but a guy who just plays a lot of man coverage and a guy who wins his matchups. And I think one of the biggest games that he proved that was against USC against Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane.
Yeah, they're just putting up numbers against Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane, some like you mentioned, one of the best receiver duos in college football. Not even just including the Big Ten, just college football as a whole. Mekhi Lemon being possibly one of the top 3 wide receivers in all of college football as of right now. Just for a corner like that coming out of Notre Dame, he's just a lot, some of iffy plays at the beginning of the year, but just continues to be a pretty good force for that defense, putting up decent numbers against Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane over this 5 game streak. Just helping this Notre Dame defense.
Well, if you think of the team like Notre Dame, what do you think of? You think of Jeremiah Love, you think of Leonard Moore, you think of Jadarian Price. You don't really think about anybody else on that side because you really see more of these guys. I think specifically you look a little more of Jeremiah Love, and even with a new starting quarterback in CJ Carr coming from Saline, Michigan, he's they've got on a 5 game winning streak, beating USC last week, and again Leonard Moore was one of those main reasons. Only put up 2 catches for 24 yards against Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane, if I'm not mistaken. He's showing why he can be an elite shutdown guy in the pros, and obviously right now in college. Now, this was an interesting name I wanted to bring up because it goes back to the Pac-12 a little bit. I wanted to give some love to the quarterbacks in the Pac-12 for Herm Morton, a guy who, again, with Texas Tech, they got paid. A lot of these players got paid good amount of money, but he's proven. Like he's proven with 13 touchdowns, 3 picks. He's shown it, and again with receivers like Eaton Coy, Nathan Virgil, Terrence Carter, Micah Hudson, he's proved to go out there and just perform and execute the offense in perfection. I mean, he's outside of the couple games where he's been injured, he's shown a lot of promise.
Yeah, shown a lot of promise for sure. Just been lights out for the Red Raiders offense, putting up insane numbers of 13 touchdowns for only 3 interceptions, which is better than some quarterbacks in the Big Ten, and definitely bigger conferences than the Pac-12. And just keeping the Red Raiders undefeated going into the ASU game, where you fell short of the win. But I mean, you have to keep in mind what you're going up against over there. I mean, Keith Abney, one of the better corners in college football as a whole, just still being able to put up decent numbers against a corner room like that. And I mean, in the end, like I mentioned before, you fall short of the win, but still, for a quarterback coming out of the Pac-12, he's just put up really, really good numbers.
No, he wasn't even playing that game.
Right.
Like against Utah, he fell out of the game. He had to get reported for a shoulder injury, and then his backup Will Hammond came in, and put some solid numbers up and going into that ASU game. So really, he's undefeated. He's shown like this Texas Tech team can definitely go into the Pac-12 championship game with only 1 loss, and it'll probably be because of Morton himself. So that's one of the bigger guys that I feel like, again, quarterbacks, you really be a little iffy about them. You get a little bit more, you get a lot of consistency from him. Even if he's not throwing the ball to them, he's finding ways with his legs and convert some first downs and everything. But those guys are showing up. But that is going to be it for our underrated, overrated, and perfectly rated players. Again, we showed you 5 targets for each of them, and we showed you a couple of honorable mentions. I would mention maybe an honorable mention for a wide receiver. Again, it's another SEC player, but Ryan Williams obviously going up and doing well. I mean, you can go into the SEC again with LSU, a guy like Caden Durham who's doing solid when he's on the field. But again, these are a lot of players. Again, we can't get through all of them. You can't get through a lot of them. It's not a lot of you got a lot of choices, and we had a tough time trying to find some guys that we knew were going to be some solid options. But there was a really, really good opportunity to try and look at some guys, look at some better film, and look some better tape, just to kind of analyze. Again, people in general may not know about these players. Maybe they don't follow them. Right? If you're from Louisiana, you're probably only follow teams that are in Louisiana. But it's just a great opportunity just to kind of understand like who's playing well, right, and who's executing. But that is going to be all for us. We appreciate your time, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.